Hello and welcome to The Lucky Roll, an eclectic channel for eclectic games. And today we're reviewing Gale Force 9's Star Trek Away Missions. A two-player, squad-based tactical skirmish game based in the Star Trek The Next Generation universe, where players battle over the remnants of the Federation fleet after the Battle of Wolf 359. The player who scores the most mission objectives, or victory points, wins. The game also has 3 to 4 player options that we will also cover in this review, which is also a whole lot of fun, but does require a second copy of the core game. To give some context to the game's setting, the Battle of Wolf 359 took place off-screen during the episode The Best of Both Worlds, in which a Borg cube decimated a Federation defense fleet on its way to attack Earth. The Enterprise captain, Jean-Luc Picard, has been captured and assimilated by the Borg, and Commander Riker is now in charge of the Enterprise. The Enterprise, on its way to join the defense of Earth, finds the decimated Federation fleet at Wolf 359, and it serves as a fantastic moment in the TV series as it shows the power of the Borg, who are now making their way to Sector 001. A chilling and tense moment that the theme of this game has been built around, and built around beautifully, I might add. The Best of Both Worlds is considered by many fans, myself included, to be the best episode of Star Trek The Next Generation ever made. And to have a tactical skirmish board game based upon its setting is practically a dream come true. There are 2 expansions along with the core set for a maximum of 4 factions, but the core game set comes with both the Borg and the Federation, whereas the expansions add the Klingon and Romulan factions to the mix, all of whom have different reasons to be battling over the remnants of the fleet at Wolf 359. Players have the option of beaming aboard a Federation ship or a Borg cube, as the player boards are double-sided, and whilst the game strictly speaking takes place on a decimated Federation ship, there is absolutely nothing stopping you from devising your own scenario on either the Enterprise herself or a Borg cube, should you so wish. Players have a section or squad of 4 to 6 player characters, all of whom have 1 turn each over 3 rounds to score the most victory points that they can. Various squad members have differing skills which give them advantages for certain tasks, such as engineers having an extra dice roll in engineering skill tests, and command medical officers having a similar trait for command and medical tests. Victory points are scored via mission cards that players draw at the top of their turn, and they are also aided by event cards, which give them one-off advantages in certain circumstances, such as site-to-site transport by the ever-dependable Chief O'Brien, or combat improvements such as phaser rifles for Starfleet or personal shields for the Borg. Objective points are scored immediately once achieved, and at varying points players may draw additional mission and event cards as part of their turn, so a poor card draw in terms of missions or event cards is not the end of the game, should you be unlucky in your initial drafting. The game is surprisingly fast-paced and is a real dice chucker game in which dice are thrown for combat, skill checks and initiative, with custom dice that add a real nice touch to the game. It's an extremely competitive and high-scoring game, with certain mission cards giving a full 40 victory points for their completion. We've had games where the victory points total scored up to the 200s, and there's a real sense of satisfaction when you pull off a difficult and daring maneuver with a ballsy move or a lucky roll despite the odds. The components are first-rate, and the minis, whilst initially a bit off due to their oddly proportioned body sizes, make perfect sense when placed on the game and make distinguishing pieces from one another much easier. The aesthetic is perfectly attuned with the show, and the cardboard and card quality is excellent, especially given the low price of the core set. And the cards are adorned with images carefully selected from the TV show, which prove a real treat for hardcore fans such as myself when I see a mission objective card such as Fire Antimatter Spread and pull it off mid-game, remembering its resulting impact on the show. It's a small thing, but for genuine fans it can give extra context for the mission, extra immersion, and a renewed sense of urgency and achievement when you draw specific mission cards like it. This game just screams fan service. And the reason it does is because it's a game that was so obviously crafted with love and care from genuine fans of the show. The mission and event cards in particular do an excellent job of giving immersion, as carefully selected images from the TV series are added with the scenario and the context of the card in mind, and give just that little extra level of immersion for you when you scheme on how to pull it off. There is an awful lot to love here. But before I elaborate further on my favourite parts of this game, I need to point out that what Gale Force 9 have done exceptionally right here, along with the aesthetics and the theme, is that they have kept the mechanics streamlined and simple. There are no convoluted modifiers or extenuating details on things like line of sight or positioning. The take cover mechanic is simple and terrain on the board is decorative rather than impactful. So if you can draw a line from the terrain square that one character occupies to another, you can target them regardless of how carefully your opponent tries to tuck their character into a corner or how much they try and cower under Beverly Crusher's desk. Dice, when thrown, are matched up with each other. Both attacking and defending dice then cancel each other out depending on score, and players are allowed to discard either an event or a mission card to re-roll if needs be, which is a good way to allay frustration both in combat and in skills tests. Combat is also impactful because if you lose a team member or a certain skill set, it makes the rest of your game more difficult. However, a neat little mechanic that Gale Force 9 have brought in here is called bonus actions. If your opponent has more minis than you at the start of the round, then you get bonus action tokens, which allow you to take one additional move per turn, which can be surprisingly powerful, as it gives your remaining characters extra opportunities to score objectives or to do more impactful damage on their opponent or indeed opponents. As for the factions in the game, I can literally say that they nailed it. The Federation, whilst highly skilled and mobile, are outnumbered, and a very definite case of quality over quantity. Event cards can be character specific, so when a player chooses to play Riker, for example, they can draw a Riker's Orders card, which allows the Federation player to move 2 other pieces out of turn in order to score objectives in other parts of the ship. They're also a very high scoring faction that scores quickly, but if damage is inflicted upon them, they can be very impacted on the late game. Whereas the Borg, in contrast, are slow starters, but very powerful in the third round when all pieces have been placed. The Federation has Riker, Shelby, Data, and Worf. Data, of course, is the most powerful character in terms of attrition, and Worf, being Worf, is the most powerful combat-wise. The Borg faction are incredibly fun to play, as there are 6 pieces. Locutus, himself, and 5 drones arrive on the ship in stages, and whilst not as mobile as the Federation player, can beam in where they wish upon the ship, and have a brilliant hive mind mechanic, in which one piece can sacrifice its turn in order to give an additional turn to another. My friend Tony utilised this mechanic to devastating effect when he whittled down my poor Commander Data to nothing with combat turn after combat turn after combat turn, all in the same round. I won the game, but the loss of my favourite character to the Borg soured the victory for me. This is the other great aspect to the Borg faction: assimilation. When I played the Borg, I had managed to assimilate Commander Shelby in my first turn, turning her from my opponent's piece into mine. This meant that not only had I an extra turn on my rounds, I also had an improved skill set that I had inherited from the poor Commander Shelby that I was able to utilise to devastating effect, as it gave me extra dice rolls for engineering skill checks. The Borg, with the exception of Locutus, have no skill sets, so the addition of Shelby into my collective made a significant difference to me. Another great little difference to the factions in the core set is that the Federation need coordination in order to score their largest mission point cards. So for example, a Federation player will need one piece in engineering and another on the bridge simultaneously to score or even attempt skill checks, whereas the Borg simply assimilate the technology and sit on a single objective. They may need to roll 7 successful dice rolls in skill checks over a series of turns in order to score it, but they will do it. So a Borg may take a turn or 2 or 3 if they're unlucky to score a card, whereas the Federation can do it almost instantly. The 2 expansion factions are also a lot of fun. The Klingons, naturally being Klingons, are all about the combat, so they are less interested in salvaging equipment and more interested in dying honourably. Led by Chancellor Gowron himself, they are focused on killing the enemy, and even if your Klingons die in the attempt, as long as they died honourably, you still score points. The Romulans are highly mobile, but are there for the tech and less interested in combat. They can use intel to their advantage and are a more skilled faction to play than the others. They are led by the infamous Commander Sela, the Romulan half-daughter of Tasha Yar, who was criminally underused in the show. Whilst the box distinctly advertises this as a 2-player game, 3- and 4-player games are also possible, and the game turns from a tactical duel into what is essentially a free-for-all slugfest in which players are holding others off with certain pieces whilst desperately trying to score with the remainder. It is worth noting, however, that the Federation in our games ended up being a little bit bullied more than most because they were thinner on the ground, more highly skilled, and most likely because they were the Federation. In our first game, Tony was busy sending wave after wave of Klingons to be dispatched by Worf, whereas I had assimilated Commander Shelby and immediately put her to work for the greater good of the Borg collective. Eric's Romulans had simply bunkered down in the Borg cube, scoring what points they could before reluctantly venturing out to gather intel, and the game ended in an absolute hate slugfest between Commander Data and Locutus because Jack wanted to squeeze the last 10 points he could from an armory mission card in the final round. It was a mad game that had us burst out laughing at the sheer audacity of some of the scenarios our pieces found themselves in. But what genuinely impressed me was that despite the variances in our factions and the absolute mayhem in our 4-player games, the points were still closely tied. This is a well-balanced game and one that's been crafted with a lot of love. The 4-player option has 2 bridges and 2 engineering sections, which we found a little immersion breaking. But this was easily fixed by flipping the terrain board over to the Borg side, which allowed us to pretend that the Borg had assimilated parts of the ship like in Star Trek First Contact, and gave the players 2 effective battlegrounds without sacrificing immersion. There are 2 new factions coming out for this game, a second Federation faction with an unassimilated Picard, Beverly Crusher, Geordi LaForge and Wesley Crusher, and another Klingon faction from the House of Duras, who would be blood enemies of the current Klingon faction and Commander Worf particularly. There is also a Q tournament set that is due, which there is not much information on at this time, but does give the impression that Gale Force 9 have big plans for this game. And the thought of that makes me a very happy Star Trek and indeed board game fan. I genuinely hope that this game has a bright future ahead of it, because the idea of battling on other places such as Klingon Birds of Prey or Romulan Warbirds, or even iconic areas such as Deep Space Nine with these game mechanics just thrills me. There is great potential here, and given that the cost of the core set is only €50 for a game that's wonderfully produced with a proven license that is excellently implemented by people who are fans of it, it is most definitely a game that is well worth your time and your consideration. Until next time, this is Sean from The Lucky Roll. As always, if you enjoy these videos, please like, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. And until next time, live long and prosper.